All right. All right, welcome to NAST Legislative Committee, the ABLE Act webinar. We're so glad that everyone is joining us. I'm Emma with NAST. I just wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar and let you know that we will be taking questions at the end. So please submit them through the system and we will answer them at the end of the PowerPoint. So now I will let Mary take it away.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone for joining us. I was just saying we have a bunch of people signed up for this. ABLE seems to bring out everybody, so we're all trying to sort our way through and figure out what it means for us, and so we appreciate the opportunity from the NAST community. I think the attendees on this are probably a lot of our usual suspects that have been spending a lot of time on ABLE, as well as some folks who from treasuries around the country that know a little bit about it, that know that they might get some questions with their General Assembly sessions coming up this year, whether they've passed legislation or not. And so we thought this webinar coming in December might make some sense to help people give a little bit of background and also give you a feel for what some states who have really dug in and are maybe further along than some of the rest of us in actually implementing ABLE are doing. So I am joined today with three of the folks that have been doing that and really on the forefront of developing ABLE programs in their states. Will Thompson from Florida, Kathleen McGrath from Pennsylvania, and Rachel Beyer from Nebraska, the NAST 529. And they each have got, I think, really interesting things to say about how their states are implementing ABLE. I'm going to start us off today with the easy part of it. I said I'll moderate the webinar and I'll do the easy stuff. So this outline just shows you what we're going to try to cover today. And roughly broken down, I'll cover a little bit about the federal side of it, and I'm going to go really fast through this. But as Emma said, if you've got questions or you want to go more deeply into it, we may hold the questions until the end if they seem to fit and we can make it work well without interrupting the flow of this conversation, then we will hit it. But I'm going to hit a couple of highlights from just what is the ABLE Act, what's the status of the federal regs and guidance, and I think that's what probably most of you have at least some familiarity with. And then we're going to turn to where the states are at the end of 2015 as we approach, not quite to the day, I guess, but pretty close. We're about a year into the enactment of ABLE and wanted to see where the states are in terms of implementing and talk a little bit about what the challenges are that we've seen, those of us that have been working on it a lot for the last year, and then talks very specifically about a couple of implementation models. Kathleen in particular has been leading a group of states on a multi-state collaboration model, and then there's a host state model and also really an individual state model. And Nebraska's going to go through, Rachel's going to go through a case study for Nebraska because they are fairly far along on that. And Will's also, when he talks, will be talking a little bit about what Florida's doing in terms of their implementation. So we'll move on first to the federal framework. And I will tell you what I think you mostly know, the ABLE Act, which is Achieving a Better Life Experience, the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience ABLE Act is law. Stephen Beck is actually a Virginia resident who started this initiative, probably close to 10 years ago, I guess, across a kitchen table. He had one ABLE child for whom he had college savings accounts and a child with some disabilities, and started wondering why there wasn't something to allow families to save for those children for the needs that they're going to have in the future. And that's really where this entire effort came from. And again, there was overwhelming congressional support. It took them 8 years, I guess, and a number of introductions in Congress, which those of us who work in everything in 529 side know it takes a long time to get an act through Congress. But on December 19th last year, the ABLE Act became law with really incredible numbers for a Congress that can't agree on much of anything. We had overwhelming congressional support. It created a brand new section, so for those that might have any misconceptions, it is not subsection A of section 529, but it is a new code section 529A, which authorizes tax advantage savings programs for certain persons with disabilities. So a couple of things that it does. It enables, just like a college savings account, saving for the future, but perhaps, at least for some people, one of the more important parts of ABLE is that it protects eligibility for certain public benefits that have some very strict asset limitations for folks to continue to receive federal benefits. And so the ABLE Act allows people to save for the future and protect those benefits. Just as you have with college savings, tax-free growth as long as the contributions and earnings are used for qualified disability expenses. I'm not going to go over the details of that, although we can talk about some of them. It is a very broad definition. It will vary, we know, from disability to disability and can include living expenses, all medical expenses, transportation expenses. It is a very broad interpretation, and there's no adverse income impact. So again, on the public benefit side or for the folks with disabilities, they don't have an adverse income impact as long as they meet the criteria and of an ABLE account and stick with the limits that are given. So, if you've heard anything about ABLE, you know that it has some challenges peculiar to ABLE that we don't have in 529 college savings, and that's going to be some of what we talk about as we go through today and what's difficult in implementing this brand new program. And it's one of the things that will provide some challenges just on getting to any kind of scale and actually getting people to participate. So I've listed just a handful. There are more, but these seem to be the key ones. You're limited to a single ABLE account per eligible individual. Now there's been discussions, and we think there's some flexibility in how each state characterizes what constitutes an account. So there could be different positions, different types of investments within a single account, but that single account will have all of the restrictions, including the contribution limits and overall maximums that are provided for in ABLE accounts. The account owner has to be the designated beneficiary. So that's true. The beneficial ownership, if you will, has to be that person with a disability, a qualified person with a disability. What that means for a minor or someone with a disability who does not have the mental competency to handle their financial affairs is that the account has to be owned by the beneficiary, but it can be through a parent, a guardian, someone with a power of attorney. Again, it's fairly broad, and as we've talked with Congress, we think that that's going to be fairly flexible, but still, ultimately, the beneficial owner has to be the person with a disability. The account has to be established in the state of residence of the designated beneficiary or a contracting state. We'll get to that later. There aren't any right now, but when Rachel talks about the Nebraska plan, they are anticipating at least being available to serve as a contracting state. That means a state that does not wish to or does not think they can feasibly open a program on their own could contract with another state to allow their citizens to use that state's program. So those are the only two options for individuals right now. Their state either has to have a program and they can open an account there, or they can open an account in a state with which their residence state contracts. So that is controlled by the states, not the individuals. The total annual contributions are limited to the, per account, are the federal gift tax limit. For this year, and I believe again next year, that limit is $14,000. So that will go up slowly over time, but it is a real restriction that we don't have in the college savings world to annual contributions. And there's no joint gifting for spouses, no 5-year averaging. It is a $14,000 hard cap on contributions per year. The aggregate contributions limit for college savings programs is carried over, and that is the maximum for an ABLE account. So some states are still, I don't know, let's say $275,000. I think the highest state right now is something in the neighborhood of $425,000. Whatever it is for that state, that's the limit for the ABLE accounts. And then one thing that I think we've all been thinking about a lot and trying to understand how it will work as a practical matter are the so-called Medicaid clawback provisions. What this means is that if an individual dies owning an ABLE account with proceeds and they've been receiving Medicaid benefits, the state is able to make a claim against that account for some part or all, obviously depending on how that works, of the proceeds in that account. So I understand that works very similarly to what an individual or sole party special needs trust works now. If the account owner owns the assets, then that can happen for Medicaid with special needs trusts. The same thing is true with ABLE accounts. That's something that we've heard when we talk to folks around the country that they're confused about at best, and not concerned about, I guess is probably a good word there. So that's a few of the provisions. We've waited for proposed regulations. As I said, this Act passed in December. Treasury was mandated by the ABLE Act to draft regulations before the end of June, and I think to the surprise of many, they did. What's been clear throughout all of this is that Treasury is under substantial pressure to do regulations, to draft regulations that are workable, that will allow states to implement and run ABLE programs in as efficient and cost-effective way as possible. So that's been great. Treasury, I will say, has really been a dream to work with. For anybody, again, that's worked with Treasury or tried to on the college savings side these many years, it's just a different experience, and I think that's been really great. Really had their attention. I think that's a testament to the congressional push that they've had. So there was a comment period. Through the summer, there was a comment period. We had ongoing discussions from within CSPN. We sent, I think, a total of 4 different comment letters in pieces, and that's what they had asked for as they were wrestling, as Treasury was wrestling with what do we do, what are the real big issues in the regulations that we came out with on June 22nd. How can we fix them quickly? They really solicited our input, and so we had meetings, and they said, can you put this in writing? Doesn't need to be your formal comment letter, which wasn't due until September, and so we did that. And CSPN, I think, worked really well together. We had a tight group, and then those who did a lot of the heavy lifting, and then a broader group that was providing input and comments, and I think it worked really well. And the proof is always in the pudding on that. CSPN did file a comment letter, an official comment letter in September, along with many others from the disability community, as well as College Savings Foundation, ICI, SIFMA, I think they all filed comments. And there's a public hearing, October 14th. Kathleen McGrath ably represented CSPN. I actually made comments on behalf of College Savings Foundation. Again, there were some from the disability community and others who spoke at that public hearing. And what we wanted, what we had been asking for, next slide, there were really 4 things that in every communication we had with Treasury, we said this is what we really, really need. And again, if you need to do this or you're working on it, you need to go back obviously and read the original regs to get more flavor in what we're talking about. But self-certification on eligibility, the way the reg was initially drafted required a lot of paperwork and filings and things that were very troublesome to most states. And what we said is please allow us to have self-certification as to eligibility. And again, we're not going through what the eligibility requirements are for ABLE. I think we had another ABLE webinar on some of that earlier, and there are some decks available from CSPN as to how one qualifies for ABLE. I probably should say just basically if you are already receiving Social Security benefits or you have a certification that you have a qualifying disability and you have a doctor's note or certificate to that effect, those are the 2 main ways that you can qualify to own an ABLE account. And what we were saying is that people need to be able to self-certify that they meet the statutory criteria. We were asking that there not be a requirement for characterization of a distribution, that is, whether or not it is qualified under the ABLE Act. And then they were requiring initially that any contributor to an ABLE account provide their tax ID number. And we believe that ABLE accounts are going to have many friends and family making relatively small contributions to these accounts to assist the person with a disability who owns the account, and that was not going to be workable. The people did not want to give their numbers, and it wasn't required because all of the state programs will know, because they do it for college savings, how to limit contributions. Their main concern was that if you had an overfunding, you would need to get the money back along with earnings and tax notices about that to the contributors. And then the final and probably most important thing we said was we need interim written guidance on this ASAP. that states really feel like they are going to have trouble, at least most states, moving forward and opening a program if we don't know what the rules are going to be. And once again, they really hurt us, because what we got on November 20th, just a couple of weeks ago, was Notice 2015-81, which provided all three of the things that we requested. So that has now given us some certainty. We know how we can move forward. We can set up a program that is more simple and hopefully more cost-effective to run, because we're allowed to provide for a self-certification under penalty of perjury. There are some mandates to that, but you're able to do it. I'm sorry, go back. No distribution characterization and no contributor tax ID required. So we know that, and that's where things stand with Treasury. The final slide that I'm going to talk about is just very briefly to talk about the Social Security Administration, because, oh yeah, they're involved in this also. So we're dealing with Treasury and with regulations and with the IRS, but additionally we're dealing with the Social Security Administration. I think they're going to be key in getting the word out to individuals and obviously to people who work with persons with disabilities, managing their Medicaid benefits, their Social Security benefits, their housing allowances, all of those things that, you know, I know as someone who hasn't had to live or work in this world, is much harder to figure out than a 529 college savings program. You know, we always hear how difficult and complex they are. Trying to fight your way through any kind of disability benefits is much worse as far as I can tell. So Social Security Administration, we have opened up a dialogue with them. We've had some really good meetings, and again, they're under, I think, tremendous pressure to make this work, to be as user-friendly as possible, to provide as much flexibility as possible. They'll be publishing what they call POMs, Program Operations Manual Systems, which basically say what the rules are going to be. And they are going to be developing, and this is still to be determined. This is one of the things that I worry about personally a little bit, how that's going to work, but I'm sure everyone's going to figure it out. There are monthly reporting requirements about the opening of ABLE accounts, the existence of them, and contributions and distributions, and that has to go monthly to the SSA, and that monthly reporting mechanism needs to be sorted out, and states need to understand how that's going to work, and that remains a to-be-done task. As well as Treasury and the IRS have annual filing requirements. They do have draft forms, and they actually have a project out. We're going to be making comments on those forms as well. And that really goes very similar. It's 1099Q. Now I don't have it in my head. QR, I think it is. QA, maybe it's QA for ABLE. Sorry about that. And somebody else on the line probably knows that better than I do. But those filing requirements, I think, will be easier for us to deal with because they're going to be more similar to what we already use in college savings world for those of us that have responsibility for these programs that do college savings. For those on the line or for those states that are having to house ABLE outside of college savings, I suggest you talk to your counterparts in college savings around the country for assistance in setting up these programs. So I've talked longer than I intended to, but those of you that know me know that that's generally what I do. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Will to give us the state outlook and tell a little bit about the national implementation of ABLE and where that's going. So take it away, Will.
Thank you, Mary. States are responding quickly to offer ABLE accounts to their residents. 2/3 of the states have already enacted legislation to implement a qualified ABLE program. Further, as Mary mentioned, states are collaborating through CSPN to discuss the ABLE legislation, regulations, and implementation concerns, as well as developing comment letters, discussion forums, and guidance. Just want to reach out to everyone on the phone that's a state. If your state is not currently participating, please consider joining one of these CSPN ABLE groups. The collaboration has been excellent. With respect to implementation dates, programs will be split between early entrants and those awaiting final regulations. Examples of early entrants are Nebraska, which you'll hear about later, Ohio, and Florida, who have been moving forward based on their interpretations of the proposed regulations and reliance on the Treasury providing transition relief if their interpretations or the regulations change. We expect these and perhaps other states to launch in the first half of 2016. Other states are eager to launch ABLE programs but are waiting for the certainty of final regulations, lower program costs, For example, the ability to secure records administration systems already built for ABLE, a defined market size and participation rate, common program features and policies, and/or even the funding necessary to launch. State collaboration and the ABLE residency requirements have created various models for implementing an ABLE program. First, of course, states may independently develop a qualified ABLE program. This may provide the most autonomy over policies, timing, and other considerations that your state may be interested in, but likely will have the highest program cost. Second, a state may contract with another state for a program, as Mary mentioned. This model is a fast and cost-effective way to launch an ABLE program for your state, but likely will require deference of program policy and structure to your sister state. Third, states have been working together creatively to develop a middle ground between the pros and the cons of those first two models. You will hear shortly about consortiums from Kathleen, and then about more of a host or franchise type concept from Rachel. Regardless of the model, we will have a steep learning curve as we introduce a new product to this market and show individuals that this is a valuable, trustworthy product that will ultimately benefit them in the long run. Next, we will take a brief look at the status of state legislation since the ABLE Act passed almost a year ago. May I can go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Virginia has been tirelessly tracking the status of all of the state legislation on behalf of CSPN since the beginning. This information has been valuable to states drafting or amending legislation, as they can reach out to other sister states for advice or language or interpretations. This is a brief summary as of last month for your consideration, but as you can see, the majority of states have already taken an action on the ABLE Act. Next, we will consider recent survey results that may assist states understand and prioritize the benefits and detractors of ABLE accounts. So to help our program's learning curve, we emailed over 50,000 individuals with disabilities and their caregivers a 16-question survey last month. We received a total of 302 completed responses. So while the response rate wasn't very high, it was a fairly lengthy survey at 16 questions. While most individuals with disabilities in Florida and their families are likely unfamiliar with the ABLE Act, 94% are interested in receiving more information about ABLE accounts. The respondents anticipate obtaining this information primarily through the ABLE program and its marketing materials, but also online searches, speaking with an attorney or a financial advisor, and/or contacting their advocacy organization. We reached three conclusions regarding the anticipated benefits of ABLE accounts. First, the benefit of maintaining or qualifying for federal benefits is anticipated to exceed the value of tax-free earnings on contributions. Second, an ABLE account having fewer restrictions than a special needs trust is anticipated to be slightly more important than an ABLE account having lower costs than a special needs trust. Third, the importance of having a savings account in the name of the individual is anticipated to be more important than using an ABLE account as an estate planning tool. We found those types of relationships very interesting in how we will be prioritizing our type of materials and really conveying the value proposition of ABLE accounts to those individuals in Florida. Likewise, we also learned about the anticipated detractors from ABLE accounts. First, with the focus being on federal benefits, many families are going to be concerned about the Medicaid repayment and whether having an ABLE account will impact the individual's federal benefits negatively. This is still a new program. They haven't seen it. They see the words that it won't have an impact, but until they actually see that ABLE accounts are out and there actually is no impact, there may still be some concern. Second, individuals with disabilities and their caregivers may have difficulty determining whether they qualify for an ABLE account, and if so, whether they actually have a need for an ABLE account. Third, while some indicate that the $14,000 annual limit would be a detractor, most are concerned about having sufficient funds to contribute in the first place. So that helps us know a type of balance for the individuals when they're coming to our programs to decide, should I sign up? We believe that the information, both the benefits and the detractors, will help us with our program materials, and we're looking to refine it over the next few months before we launch. Next, we'll look at many features states are considering for their programs. Online account functionality offers 3 important benefits. First, individuals with disabilities will benefit from a simple online application form. Based on the proposed regulations and the latest guidance that Mary just covered, we anticipate programs to accept self-certification of eligibility across the board in an online application. Second, individuals with disabilities will benefit from existing 529 records administration systems. We're seeing a lot of those players that we have already in the 529 space coming forward, looking and being willing to modify their existing structure to meet ABLE. So we can expect a lot of those same functions that we already have today that have matured over the last couple of decades. Third, programs can help control costs by utilizing electronic communications. Cost is going to be a very key factor for these programs, and being able to reduce on what could be a lot of paper correspondence will likely have a major impact. Of course, programs will look to modify existing records administration systems to address who can access the account, contribution sources, types of investment options, and distribution processing, all of which may be different than 529. First, we anticipate at least 2 roles, the beneficiary and an administrator, caregiver, parent, guardian, agent, someone of those of that type, who will be able to perform actions on an ABLE account. Second, a significant number of contributions may come from a person other than the beneficiary. As Mary noted, maybe family members, maybe friends. Therefore, there would likely will be opportunities for gifting platforms and other ways to contribute funds. Further, programs will have to determine whether to accept credit card contributions. However, we do believe that it's unlikely for programs to accept credit cards initially, if at all. There are some complications, costs, and regulations that deal with credit cards that may make this a little bit more of a hurdle. Third, until we have more information about how ABLE accounts are actually used, determining the full suite of investment options may be challenging. Currently, we anticipate programs offering mostly low to medium risk investment options at the beginning, as there's a wide variety from very short-term usage to more estate planning, and therefore the right mix of investment options can be very challenging. Fourth, distributions are an important policy area. While the Treasury has clarified that programs are not required to track distribution reasons and classifications, programs face considerations about debit cards, prepaid cards, and limitations on the number of checks produced by month, by quarter, by year. Currently, we anticipate programs to offer check distributions with a reasonable quantity limitation to control costs, and perhaps electronic distributions. The cost of offering debit cards and prepaid cards likely will delay policy decisions until the market has been established. Next, Kathleen will discuss how ABLE varies from 529 and how states may implement a qualified ABLE program.
Thanks, Will. If you're looking at this slide, need for different implementation approach, you'll see that some of these items are items that Mary has already talked about. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on some of them in terms of how they will impact our decision and how we implement 529. So I think combined, they're likely to severely limit the number of ABLE accounts and the assets, or at least compared to 529, and here's why. Well, the first thing is the eligibility requirement. As you know, in the 529 world, there really aren't any eligibility requirements. We focus on kids under 18, but these accounts can be opened for anybody of any age. And so the population the whole population is eligible. On the ABLE side, the first thing you have to have is an eligible individual, and that means they have to have a fairly serious disability that results in functional limitations. One way to qualify is to be SSI eligible. That simply means that you have a low income and you meet pretty stringent criteria for your disability. The other way is through Social Security disability. Those have essentially the same requirements for the disability, but the person has some work earnings so that they're qualified under Social Security, not under Supplemental Security. And then the last way is you receive neither of those benefits, but you have a severe disability. And the statute says it has to be medically determinable, either physical or mental. It has to result in a marked and severe functional limitation expected to result in death or to last 12, has lasted or will last 12 months. And on top of all that, the onset has to have been before age 26. So the population that is even eligible to open these accounts is so much smaller than in the 529 world. So then the second restriction is that there can only be one account. As you know, in the 529 world, you can have any number of accounts. So divorced mom and divorced dad can each have an account. Grandma, grandpa can have an account. And the account owner has control, complete control over the account, even though in the 529 world, it's in the beneficiary's estate. That's not the case in ABLE. There is concern that the lack of control will discourage people from contributing to the account. The eligible individual beneficiary will be the account owner, and as long as they're an adult and mentally competent, they will have complete discretion on how to spend the money. So, just to ask the question, how many folks are going to put in a sizable amount of money for, someone else to use as they see fit. I always say, the 18-year-old who has not yet attained the financial wisdom that some of us older folks have and could, decide to go cross country and see an ex-girlfriend. So the other limit we have is the $14,000 account limit. Now, I think this isn't as big a problem as some of the others because really in the 529 world, how many people put in $14,000 or more a year? But what it does limit is, for example, if there's a court settlement, the child is injured in an accident and there's a court settlement of $100,000, can't all be put into an ABLE account in the same year. Or if people wanted to roll over some trusts that they already have established, they couldn't do that except on a $14,000 by $14,000 a year situation. There is an aggregate contribution limit, as Mary said, and it's the same that you have for your 529. But if you look at, for example, Pennsylvania, at $14,000 a year, it's going to take over 32 years to get to our contribution limit. There's no 5-year proration, so that is, going to limit the assets coming in. Mary mentioned the Medicaid clawback, and I think that will also limit the assets coming in. We've talked to lots of families who said, gee, if the money I'm putting in, it could ultimately go to the government to repay Medicaid, why would I do that? And while what's called a first-party special needs trust can be subject to clawback, that's when the beneficiary's own money is in that trust. What's called a third-party trust, other people put money in for their beneficiary, is not subject to clawback. So if you've got any sizable amount of money, you may seriously consider a third-party special needs trust over an ABLE account. So larger amount of money may go or still go to special needs trust rather than to the ABLE account. So we can't predict with any reasonable reliability how many eligible individuals there are, how many accounts will be opened, what contribution amounts will look like, how and when accounts will be used, whether they'll be transactional or short or long-term savings. But what we can be sure of is that there's going to be way fewer accounts, way fewer assets, and it's going to take a lot longer for assets to grow to scale. We know that. Put on top of that, that many states are not providing state revenue for implementation. and that unlike 529, we haven't heard a lot of private sector folks who are willing to upfront the cost, knowing that they'll recoup it over more years, probably a likely result of the fact that they just don't see the assets coming in as quickly as they did in the 529 market. So all of that leads us to implementation models. And in this, I'm going to expand a little bit on what Will said about the different implementation approaches. First of all, the Act really recognizes three implementation approaches. The home state approach, which is just a state having a program for its own state residents, pretty straightforward. But then there's this concept of a contracting state. So that's a state that decides it will not have a program of its own. And specifically, the federal law mandates that you cannot have a program if you're going to be a contracting out state. So you can't have, say, your own, let's say, stable value program, but then contract out to someone else for an advisor program. You can't do that. It would contract, a contracting state would contract with another state that does have a program, a home state program, and thereby that home state would also become the host state. Now, the statute is written in the singular so that a contracting state can contract with a home state, a host state. However, in the comments to some of the regulations, some commenters suggested that they should not be limited to contracting to just one state. So that is an open question, whether a single contracting state could contract with several host states. But we see a fourth option here, and this is not expressly mentioned in the statute, but several states see no prohibition on it, and that fourth option is a collaborative model. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. But essentially, what this is a group of home states that use common ABLE program elements. So of these four different approaches, each state is going to have to determine which one it wants to be. And there are different considerations for each one. The home state is pretty straightforward. You know, you just create your own program. The state has full control over what it is. The host and contracting states are a bit more complicated. Looking at it from the contracting state's point of view, there are lots of questions. What due diligence does it have to undertake to pick the host state it will contract with? Does the contracting state have a fiduciary duty to its residents to pick the, quote, best host state? And if it does, how would it determine that? What reports, if any, will it get? Will it have auditing rights? What oversight, if any, will it have? And what, if any, fees would the contracting state receive from the host state so they can do auditing or oversight? What's an acceptable length of term for the contract, and what happens at the expiration of that contract? Can the contract be terminated before it expires by either side? You know, when you leave, can you take the accounts with you? Excuse me, if you're the state. From the host state's point of view, it's the converse of all those questions. How much is it willing to give the contracting state, and at what cost? It's pretty clear in the host contracting state situation that the host state has control, but that is subject to whatever, if anything, it grants the contracting state within the contract it has. So let's look at the next slide and look at collaboration and what we're thinking there. First of all, it's very much in the discussion stages. In fact, there's a two-day meeting starting tomorrow with about 16 states, and you can see them listed there, that have shown some interest in collaborating. The basic concept here is that each state would have a say in the plan's creation. They would each have their own, quote, home state. But the states would make joint decisions. Each state has its own plan, but the plans all have common ABLE program elements.
Do we know? Okay. Yeah, we lost Kathleen. I don't think I'm the only one, and she's not showing up as green. No. Somebody text me if I'm the only one that lost her. Yeah, okay, so apparently well, hopefully she'll come back on, Kathleen, if you can dial back in, or if you lost us. We have gotten to the part of hers that Kathleen knows the most about, so I am going to probably just say maybe we can shift over, and Kathleen, if you come back on, we will finish, because I think this is really interesting. As you can see, you've got 16 states who are thinking about, and I think this really goes to what states are struggling with it, which is, how do we do this? How do we create this brand new program with all of the limitations that Kathleen just went over, and do that in a cost-effective manner, because we know that that's going to be important to folks as well. So I'm going to move on, because the next part, she went through that, and I think what Rachel can talk about is really how a program just sets up their own program, but I also know that Nebraska is looking to be available as a host state for any state that wants to be a contracting state. So Rachel, can you shift over to yours, and then Kathleen, hopefully maybe text us, because we can see that, so we can see it, and then we will make sure that we let you wrap up your collaboration slide at the end. Okay? You with us, Rachel? Can you take over?
Perfect.
With the
yes.
Nebraska Enable?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to participate in the webinar today to talk about what Nebraska has been up to. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide. In May of this year, our state passed the Nebraska ABLE Enabling Act, and that legislation does permit us to have our own home state plan, and as well gives us the opportunity to contract with other states that do not have an ABLE program. In July, we issued our RFP for program management services, and just last month, a few weeks ago, the investments were approved by our Nebraska Investment Council, and that same day we were able to sign our program and management agreement with First National Bank of Omaha, and they will serve as our state's ABLE program manager, which we are calling an ABLE Savings Plan. The ABLE Savings Plan was definitely put together by First National Bank, and we are working with them to really embrace Nebraskans and also to be able to replicate that in other states. We do anticipate to go live with our program next summer, so the summer of 2016. And for any of you interested, you can certainly check out our interim website at enablenebraska.com.
Rachel, this is Kathleen. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I think I...
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry that I don't know what happened. I was talking and then there was nothing. So I don't know if you want me to pick back up where I was, or if you want to continue.
If you want to go ahead and finish, Kathleen, that's no problem. That works for me if that works for Mary.
Okay, I will. Chris Hunter tells me that I had just pointed out the number of states that were talking together. And so I'll pick up there and talk a little bit more about the collaborative model. I don't know if you heard that we're having a 2-day meeting starting tomorrow. The basic concept is that each state will have a say in the plan's creation. We will make joint decisions. Each state will have its own plan, so each state will be a home state, but each plan will have common ABLE program elements. And each state will have been engaged in the decision-making process. The biggest common elements we have will be who the record keeper is and who the investment manager is. But even within those, there may be some options. For example, there might be 6 investment options that each state could choose among, and one of the states may choose 3, while another may choose all 6. Other common elements are the call center. You might be able to join in one unified call center, or decide to have your own call center. And marketing, of course, the marketing would be subject to customization. So, for example, there would be an enrollment brochure that would have the same content but different name, logo, and any different state-specific benefit information. So we see this model as being different from the contracting state model in that the contracting state model, the host state creates the program, as Rachel has, and the contracting state's primary decision is whether to choose that state as its host or any of the other states that might offer to become host states. In the collaborative model, we see each state having an equal voice in what is created. The other thing that's clear in the collaborative model is that the accounts are the accounts of each separate state. At the end of the contract period, each state is free to explore any other options. At that point, a state can exit the collaborative group. It can take its account and its related assets with it. We envision that our relationship among the states will be governed by an interstate agreement, essentially a contract, and that contract would create a decision-making body, which at this point we're calling the Executive Management Committee. And we've already agreed as the working group that each state would have one vote, regardless of the state size. We're not looking at population. We're just looking at one state, one vote. The Executive Management Committee would determine the rules, how to apportion fees and expenses, resolve any disputes. And our goal is to achieve economies of scale by pooling all the assets in the accounts, so the assets under management will grow faster than each state going it alone. But it's also to share expenses. So, for example, if we were to hire somebody to write a disclosure statement, we could have somebody do that for all of the participating states, subject to some customization, but the basic disclosure statement would be the same, and we would all share in the expenses of that endeavor. So at this point, at least, as I said, we have about 16 states, none of whom have committed, but all who are interested in exploring and discussing, and we are certainly willing to have others join us if other states want to engage in the discussion. If you do, just send me an email and I'll pass your interest on to all the other group. And with that, I will turn it back to Rachel to give a little bit more about what their state is doing and how it hopes to be a host state. Rachel, and thanks for letting take it over in my absence.
And you answered the question that we had from Arkansas about how to join in the conversation. So thanks to that. And Rachel, take it away.
Thank you. We'll go to the general program features slide. Will be the next one after this one. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move through this fairly quickly so that we can leave room for other questions if there are any. So we hit that 1 hour mark. Like our 529 plans that all of us have, we're making sure that the general features of the program are very similar, but with ABLE, we will be making sure that it is ADA compliant. Some other websites already like that that you may be experiencing, but we are focusing on working with ABLE advocates and the ABLE Volunteer Advisory Committee. One of the things that First National was very cognizant of when they were putting together the proposal was reaching out to folks in the disability community, and we are designing our program to make sure that it does work for those folks in that community and meets their varying needs that they have. You can see the rest of the bullet points there that are really typical general features of programs such as these. We can go quickly to the next slide of the Nebraska tax benefits. As mentioned earlier, the earnings are tax deferred. In Nebraska, we do have an state income tax deduction for contributions up to $10,000. That is the same as our 529 college savings, and our contribution limit is $360,000. We can go on to the next slide. The enable specific account features will allow be able to open, maintain, and view their accounts online. There will be self-certification for the disability and state of residence when an account is opened. Contributions can be made by check, electronic bank transfer, automatic investment plan, and payroll deduction. Qualified withdrawals will be able to occur online, over the phone, by mail form, and check writing and debit card. Systematic withdrawals will be allowed, and we will also be able to provide gift certificates and credit card rewards, and these would be so subject to federal rules. Our fees and our minimums, we are able to offer a low total asset-based fee ranging from 50 basis points to 59 basis points. Our accounts will have a $50 annual account fee, and we are looking into minimum initial contribution being waived under certain circumstances. Those details are still forthcoming. The next slide, you can take a look at our general investment options. We felt it was important in working with our Nebraska Investment Council and First National Bank to offer a growth, moderate, and conservative option, as well as a bank savings option. We do have a bank savings option in our 529 college savings accounts, and wanted to make sure we were able to offer that with these as well. You can see the asset allocations and how those break down throughout the different portfolios there in the table. And we will be offering check writing and debit card functionality as well. So that would be different than what's in our college savings plan and would be a new feature in our Enable savings plan. As was mentioned by several of the panelists, Nebraska is able to serve as a contracting state. State Treasurer Don Stenberg does intend to enter into discussions with other states to contract with Nebraska. We are still going through and working on the details of how the contracting states will work. However, we do know that we would have a couple of choices to consider. States could use Enable Savings Plan as designed without changes, but there would of course be separate accounting for those accounts. Or states would have the ability to customize marketing and some other services. For example, we would definitely work with states on their customization for their public-facing, their logo, things that they would want specific for their states and for their customers in those states. Again, as I said, specific details are being worked on a state-by-state basis, and any state that is interested in learning more about those details that will be forthcoming on how that model will work, we'd love to hear from you, and you're welcome to contact me here at the state of Nebraska, and my email is on the slide, or you can, of course, find me on the phone as well. And like I said, I went through that rather quickly, but looking at the time, I did want to make sure we were leaving enough time for questions from the group. So,
thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
That's really interesting. I'm going to remind people you need to type in questions. We have about 5 minutes. We don't have any questions waiting, so I'm going to throw one out. But before we do run out of time, one question that we had was, would the slides be available? And yes, they will. After this webinar, the slides will be available on the NAST website as well as the CSPN website. And I will make sure we have a link, or actually the spreadsheet itself on the CSPN website, and I'm sure we can get that moved over to the NAST website as well if you're interested, particularly states that are still looking at their legislation or looking at tweaking their legislation if they already have it into next year, that there is a link with more detail on the status of every state, which ones have considered, which ones have passed, and links in many instances to the actual enabling legislation. So if you're interested in that, we'll make that available on the NAST website as well. I think that's kind of interesting information. I had a question, one quick one for you, Rachel, on because I think debit card functionality is a great option, the check writing and debit card, something that we're looking at in Virginia as we figure out how to open up this program. I think we're a little bit behind some of you all, so we're hoping to open in 2016, but don't know when. But have you sort of worked that out? I assume your bank partner has agreed to provide the check cashing and debit card option. Do you see that as being problematic or pretty easy to implement, or have you gotten far enough along to really think about that?
Thank you, Mary, for the question. Check writing and debit card functionality was a requirement in our request for proposals that we submitted. Those functions are very important to Treasurer Stenberg and wanted to make sure that that was part of our program. We don't have a lot of detail to share on that particular item. We are working through that, and it will be offered. We do have some information, but it's a little bit premature to share that at this time, but it will be part of our Enable Savings Program, and like I said, it was something that is of great value, we feel, to folks using this program. That is something that they, in talking with the community, that's what they wanted in a program. So we are going to be offering that, but to give you specifics on that right now would be a little bit premature, but those details will be forthcoming.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Kathleen, I see a question's come in asking where the collaborative meeting will be taking place. Is it via conference call, web, or in person? I think you have somebody that wants to join in.
It's in person in Chicago. Although if the person wants to email me at kfmcgrath at patreasury.gov, I can see if there is an ability to call in.
Okay, that's great. Hopefully everyone got that. We'll add that out there. But K.A. McGrath?
KF as in Frank.
KF McGrath at patreasury.gov. Okay. And then let's see. We've got Matt Pulio has asked, are there resources available? This is for you, Rachel, to send someone to Maine to testify on partnering with Nebraska when we have public hearings on the bill this session. So I assume they're going to be looking at having the ability to be a contracting state.
Sure. We can, if Matt wants to reach out directly to me, I'd really appreciate having that conversation with Maine, and we could certainly look into what we'd be able to do to send someone to Maine. I think that's what he's asking, to help them work through that and possibly be a contracting state. But
yep.
We can definitely talk through that with him.
Okay, so contact Rachel, and I'm sure they will try to be helpful. Here's another one for you, Rachel. Again, just confirming that there would not be a cost to contract with Nebraska, I guess, and that's been one of those questions I think that I've gotten as I've talked to some other states about contracting, but simply that the participants and savers in the plan would incur the investment management and annual account fees. Is that correct?
Again, we're working through those details, and those details are being developed. So, there's really not a lot I can answer directly on that at this time because we have not finalized what that model will look like in its entirety. So we are working on those details, to figure out what fee would be there would be to participate with Nebraska, and then what those fees would look like for the customer. But again, I don't have any hard numbers because we're working on that. So.
Right. I think that's a tough one, I would say, on that one also, because in Virginia, as we, work on developing a program, and, our intent is to develop one in Virginia. I think we would be open to being a contracting state, but, when we've looked at that, there are issues on both sides, right? And if you have multiple states who are willing to be a host state, then how does a state select which is going to be the contracting state? And then, right, are there fees going either way? I think some states are saying, well, this is a way for us to generate some revenue if we want to participate, and the contracting state may want to see it as a bit of a revenue generator also, particularly if you're going to be doing any customization or hosting the website. So as with everything with ABLE, it is complicated, right? I think that's what we know from the last year, actually more than a year, since some of us have worked on this while it was making its way through Congress. And I'm going to wrap up a little bit because I don't see any other questions coming in, but if you have some, we still have a couple of minutes. But I think that's sort of the bottom line, and I think you've got on this webinar some folks to contact. So if you're interested in a collaborative model, reach out to Kathleen. If you want to see particularly some of the surveys and how folks are reaching out to the disability community, it sounds like Nebraska and Rachel have been doing some of that, and clearly Florida has done that. So I think you can get some ideas for the types of questions to ask, or from Nebraska how to put together an advisory group and thinking about really working through with this community. There's one more question. Have others been getting pushback from potential program managers as well? They seem reluctant. I would say yes. I think a lot of them are sort of on the sidelines a little bit to see, because of, again, all of the challenges that Kathleen talked about. But everybody else in the group, any thoughts on that? In terms of potential program managers, and I don't know if you're talking about on the advisor side. I think that's definitely true there. It's a relatively limited number of folks who actually provide the record keeping and program management services, and so I know Florida's been working with Intuition. Will, I don't know if you want to talk about that, and I'm guessing that some of the others of you have worked with a census, and obviously Rachel and Nebraska are working with their existing partner on their program. Anybody?
Yeah, this is Will from Florida. Intuition developed another branch to give it the dedication and resources for ABLE, and so they have been building our program to be able to launch before this summer. So we'll be going live with them, and so we did not have any pushback or concern with them, and we've already worked through the requirements, and at this point we're just programming and looking forward to system testing and then going live. So there's been a lot of progress made that at least can speak for intuition with having a system ready for ABLE.
This
Great.
is Kathleen. I know that a census is working on systems as well. They've talked to the states that they provide 529 to, and that they certainly have a, they're thinking about implementation. Where I've seen more reluctance is in the investment managers. I have not heard or seen many, look to be aggressive in coming up with putting together an investment option specifically for this community.
Okay, it looks like we have one final question. This one's to you, Kathleen. For the state that hasn't enacted an ABLE program, maybe doesn't have authority until July of 16, is that going to be too late to join the collaboration, or do you see allowing states to come in on whatever timeline and make some kind of pro rata adjustments, I guess?
Yes, the group is talking, we'll agree to how additional states can come in. I think the collective thinking is the more the merrier. So as states, look at us and decide that the collaborative model will work for them, we would certainly welcome that at a later time.
Okay, and I'm going to guess, as with most things with ABLE, maybe that's the best way to wrap this up. So I think we sort of go off at 3, so I don't want to go beyond it and lose the group. But a lot of details still to be worked out, but clearly a lot of progress has been made in the last year. Reiterate Will's comment, if you are on this call and you're working on this and you are not on one of the CSPN groups, at least on the email groups, so you get all the notifications, please contact Chris Hunter is going to be your best bet there. He will put you on the lists. We think we've captured most states that have agencies that are not currently providing college savings programs, in our group, but if we've missed anybody or you want to join or participate, please let us know that. This has been, as usual, as we found in college savings, a very collaborative group. And I appreciate everybody for participating. Thank you very much to Rachel and Kathleen and Will. They are tremendous resources, so use them. You've got their contact information. I'm sure we can maybe add a slide at the end of this with all of our contact info and a link perhaps to that spreadsheet that we have. We'll get that posted as soon as possible, and I think we're at 3 o'clock, so I am going to say thank you, everybody, for participating. I think we answered all the questions that popped up, but if you have more, just let one of us know, and we'll look forward to continuing to work together to provide, I hope, a really great service to persons with disabilities across the country with these ABLE programs.
And thank you, Mary. Thank you for your leadership on this as well.
Sure thing. Thank you.